Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am excited to jump on today and actually just share with you some content that I want to create in response to a question that I recently received from a parent who participated in one of my social justice parenting workshops. So I just want to read the question. I want to start by saying that obviously, for the parenting workshops that I do, there is a selection bias in a positive way. People are selecting into these conversations because they desire to learn, they desire to grow, they desire to augment their thinking and learn how to think more critically about social identity and parenting. When I got this email, instead of just responding in text, as I usually do to questions, I thought it would be a great topic to bring to the audience of viewers that I have on my channel because it is a topic that I think would resonate and be useful to more people than just this individual. So I'm just going to read the question for you. All right, the message just starts kindly by saying, "It was wonderful to hear you speak. I have a question stemming from a conversation with my 7th grade daughter. How does one deal with the desire and demand for diversity and equality while making sure the right and most qualified person is hired regardless of race, gender, and sexual orientation?" Using the workplace as an example. She said that she felt like she needed some help explaining this to her daughter and some help understanding it herself, to be honest. So to address this question, I want to start with the idea of implicit bias. The term implicit bias describes our attitudes and associated stereotypes towards people without our conscious awareness of those attitudes and stereotypes. What happens with social privilege and social disadvantage is that we tend to have implicit biases for or give the benefit of the doubt to identities that are socially privileged, where we have implicit biases against or do not give the benefit of doubt to identities that are socially disadvantaged. Now, implicit biases come into play in this question because if we really think critically about the way the question is formed, there are some inherent challenges. Firstly, what we see is that we see an assumption that in order to elect for a more diverse and inclusive environment, we may have to compromise quality, when in fact, this is not the case. The subconscious or underlying idea that you would have to select a candidate who is not as good in order to have a candidate from a marginalized group, historically marginalized group, is a problem. So just because somebody does not have a heteronormative sexual orientation, or because someone is a woman, or because someone is a person of color, it does not mean that the quality of their work or their qualifications are going to be any less than anyone else. The real reason why we have had so little representation from these marginalized groups in the workplace and in other environments is because of systemic racism and systemic bias, not because of a lack of qualified candidates. The other underlying assumption that also is revealing implicit bias is that the people who are there from the majority population are uniquely and exceptionally qualified, where that also may not be the case, and it is not a safe assumption. Just because a C-suite is comprised entirely of white males does not mean that all of those white males are uniquely exceptional. There are plenty of people who are in positions of power or positions of influence who are mediocre and who have had access to those opportunities because of inequities in the system. There are many gifted, talented, highly educated, and well-trained professionals of all different races, sexual orientations, religions, ethnicities, and I would encourage an organization that is seeking to expand their diversity and be more inclusive to seek out highly qualified, talented, and gifted individuals from that pool. I think that we have challenges arise when we do have people who are selecting people for just the sake of including diversity. So what I mean by that is when you have people who do have bigoted or implicit biases, then what you find is that they don't put in the effort to seek out the most talented, the best, and the brightest because they may have in their subconscious the idea that that talent pool doesn't exist within that population. So that's a problem in and of itself. At the same time, I've worked in many different kinds of environments, and I will tell you that all of the people who are not from marginalized groups were not necessarily exceptional. And so really, in a truly equitable society, we wouldn't just have representation that included the most exceptional people from marginalized groups. We would also have mediocre people represented in the same proportion. You can take, for example, the situation where the late John McCain selected Sarah Palin from Alaska to run as his running mate in the presidential election. And I saw that as a little bit of just a diversity selection because I felt like there were many more qualified, more talented women that he could have selected to be his running mate. But in my opinion, he did not choose the most qualified or most dynamic candidate, and that might have been because of an implicit bias, or he may have had other kinds of motivations. But when it comes to including a woman on the ticket from the entire pool of women in the United States, I did not see her as the foremost candidate from the pool of women that are available to us in this country. So my own opinion, which you may or may not agree with, but at least that's one example. And I think we could say objectively there were some areas in which she lacked qualification for that position. From a parenting perspective, what I think I would advise this person to consider is allowing their child to have greater exposure to people of color, to people from marginalized groups, so that they could disentangle in their mind this idea that there are fewer qualified people coming from these pools of marginalized groups. If I look at my own child who's in the 7th grade, my own daughter who's in the 7th grade, she has had a healthy exposure to a wide range of professionals in all different kinds of fields, exceptional professionals in all different kinds of fields. And so I would say it wouldn't come into her mind that you would have to compromise quality or professionalism because you are choosing a candidate that is from a marginalized population. Another important conversation would be one about systemic bias, to understand that the pool may not be as large as we like because of inequities and opportunity along the way, but there's still a sufficient pool for people who have the intention and the desire to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace environment or whatever other environment. A final lesson that I would communicate to my daughter is that socially and even from an environmental standpoint, diversity does make us more resilient. When you have more people that are coming together from different sets of experiences and backgrounds, what we're going to have is greater synergy towards our goals. We have more people who are going to be able to weigh in and create more creative environments and create more dynamic environments towards problem solving and troubleshooting, and again, just towards generating new ideas. So this is a value that has to become very deep and intrinsic and personal to our children, for them to really understand that in all settings. I mean, this is something that I know my husband learned in business school, about having different people playing different roles, bringing different perspectives, and actually playing games where we have one person who's going to look at an idea pessimistically, and one person who's going to look at an idea optimistically, and one person who's going to only illuminate what the potential challenges could be. We need different kinds of voices, and we don't need people coming from the same cultural perspective if we are really trying to find the most creative, most sustainable, and most dynamic solutions. So that is what is enhanced when we do create more equitable workplace environments or other kinds of social environments. So to kind of summarize everything one more time, my response to this question is that what we need to do is really look at our implicit biases. If we feel that we have to compromise quality in the name of diversity and equity, that in and of itself is a problem. If we also feel that the people who are there are there because they have a unique merit, that's also a problem, and it's a single story about the experiences of the people who are trying to enter into these spaces, and a single story about the people who are in these spaces. So what we really need to do is kind of break free from those implicit biases so that we can have better judgment about what's going on and really overlay systemic processes on the outcomes that we see. Again, people are not in these positions necessarily purely because of merit, but because of inequities in the system that have led to this disproportionate representation. And people who are looking to increase diversity in these different environments can do so without having to compromise quality, because there are talented pools of people coming from marginalized communities, and we should make sure that we are exposing ourselves to people within those pools so that we have an intrinsic and authentic understanding of the capacity of people. And finally, we have to understand that diversity makes us more resilient and more creative, and that should be the kind of culture that we are trying to establish in our workplace environments and in our communities. Thank you so much for this question. I look forward to your comments and feedback below.